Welcome, everybody, to our latest ISNLive event, Navigating the Challenges of Leadership. I want to start with just a little bit of housekeeping. So we'd love for you to utilise the chat to connect with each other, and we're keen to hear from you throughout the events. We will respond where possible as well in the chat, so please do use this. I'd also love to invite you to register for your ISN membership if you haven't already. So this is a free membership. This enables you then to publish work, to stay on top of different events that we have running, and to look at our full back catalogue of discussions and articles. So it's a really great resource for international educators. So I will just drop that link in there if you haven't already registered for your free membership. And so finally, as well, the certificate for this event will be available at the end. I will post the link, and I will also email the link as well to everybody who has attended for the full session. So thank you, everybody. And we're just going to then get started. So welcome again for this latest ISNLive event, which is about navigating the challenges of leadership. So leadership is rewarding, it is challenging and complex. In education, it demands adaptability, empathy, and clarity. This event is for those who are stepping into or growing within leadership roles. While we know there's often a lot of in-house support, we recognise that it's also useful to hear from experts outside of your school setting. Today, our fantastic panel of experts will delve into strategies for handling interpersonal dynamics, leading with emotional intelligence, and fostering a cohesive, motivated team, even during times of change. So kicking things off for us today is Matthew Burfield, Senior Vice President at GEMS Education. Matthew is an outstanding leader, successfully opening and leading in 5 new schools over the past 8 years and driving sustained improvement across existing campuses, raising inspection ratings and strengthening school culture and identity. Matthew also serves on many educational boards and acts as a lead improvement partner and inspector. Welcome, Matthew. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you very much, Claire. That's an introduction. Let's hope I can live up to that, everybody. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's out there. I'm going to share my screen now. Now, I'm not a great Zoom user, so I'm going to rely on somebody to tell me I've done okay. Okay, cool. So lovely to see you all online, and I hope that I am going to manage to live up to those very laudable statements that Claire has just made about me. But I've been given the task today to talk to you about navigating the challenges of leadership. Now, to try and cover that in what I've been given 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to do my best. But what I'm going to try and do is just at least give you some insight into the way that I view this. Some of the examples through my career or with colleagues that I've worked with, where I hopefully have been able to navigate the many challenges of school leadership. I haven't got time to go into what those are, but I'm hoping that in our questions with our panel, we'll be able to do a bit more of that. So I'm just going to start by sharing with you a really simple cycle. And this cycle is meant to be and is deliberately done this way to go back to each other and link with each other. And it starts with the concept of culture, recruiting and retaining the very best talent, and then making sure that you invest in those colleagues through the best possible professional development. So I'll talk through this cycle. I'll give you some insights, hopefully, as we go through this into the different aspects of them. But I just want to draw your attention down to that bottom right corner, which is those 2 words, deliberate and intentional. Now, these are not quite synonyms. I know, and I have seen them used as synonyms, but they're not quite. In fact, for me, the distinction is really clear, and I've bullet pointed that here for you as well. A deliberate action takes really careful consideration and planning, whereas an intentional action actually has a specific purpose in mind. So if you're only doing one or the other, that means that you're driving towards a purpose, but not necessarily without a deliberate plan, or you're deliberately planning something, but without an intentional purpose in mind. So all the way through the slides, and hopefully I'll emphasize that as we go through, but those 2 words for me need to be intertwined, interlinked, and constantly used together. They're not synonyms, don't use them like that. They are deliberate and intentionally used like this during this presentation. I'll start with culture. Now, I know it may be a bit old-fashioned of me, but I'm going to share 3 books. And I still love books, and I hope lots of you out there still read hard copy of books. I know that we've all reading on devices these days as well, but I still love books. And these are 3 books that have really served me well in my leadership journey. And I currently am here, as Claire said, as the Senior Vice President of Education for GEMS, which means I have the honour and privilege of leading 8 schools. And that's nearly 24,000 children across the UAE in Abu Dhabi, Dubai and Sharjah. But I'm also the very proud principal of GEMS Founders School, which I was the founding principal of from 2016. And I'm actually standing in that school here today. And that has 6,250 children from its opening 9 years ago. So in terms of growth and challenges, I think that I'm definitely experienced enough to talk about that bit without sounding arrogant, but I've definitely worked in growth and challenge. And I would just like to share with you that for me, that begins and it ends with culture. Now, there are lots more experts out there that are better at this than me, but 3 books that have helped me are the psychological safety book in the middle. And I'm going to start with that because it has served me so well. When you create teams and all of you are different levels of leadership or you're emerging into leadership, but whatever team you work with, it is so important for you to create a space where you can be challenged and questioned. So often I've worked with leaders and in leadership teams where echo chambers exist, where everybody nods around the table and agrees with the person talking and then walks out the door and says the exact opposite, or worst case scenario, does the exact opposite. Now, for you to create a psychologically safe space, this means that you as a leader have to be open to challenge. You have to be open to criticism if you want the negative connotation, but in reality, you have to be open to questions. You have to have your team around you really clearly driving for that purpose, and I'll get to that second book next. But you also have to be really honest with them that you don't know everything, and you never will know everything, and you need them to make you look good. So they've got to question you, they've got to challenge you, they've got to do their best to keep pushing you forward as a leader. And it sounds really simple, but it starts with small gestures, it starts with little things, but it also is the most powerful thing I've created in any leadership team I've been a part of, is just a space where you can sit together and challenge and question. Once you leave the door, you're then aligned and agreed. But inside that space, you can disagree as much as you like. And that all starts, hopefully, with the concept of leading from purpose. Now, many of you will have come across leading with purpose, and that is absolutely a good starting point as well. But leading from purpose means that from your core, from your very core, you are clearly identifying the big question that we should always ask ourselves, which is the why. Why are we doing this? What's the reason? Why are we doing this? So hopefully, if you can always come back to that purpose, and you have a space that's created that can challenge and question you, what you'll be able to do is move that culture into a positive environment where everybody can thrive and not just survive. Now, the last one is a book called Radical Candor. And I don't know if any of you have read this out here. And I can promise you as an Englishman, it does upset me that that U is missing from candor. It really does. But it's a great book. And what it helps you understand is that in those challenging, fierce, difficult conversations, we rename that on a regular basis. But in those conversations that you're having with colleagues, you're doing it with integrity and you're doing it with honesty. It's a really powerful book. So I'm recommending you out there to go and read it. I prefer for you to read it as a book, but if you have to download and read it, at least it will give you the same insight. These 3 books create culture and allow you as a leader to drive your vision and your purpose and your mission forward together as a team. Now, the second element in this cycle is recruiting and retaining. Recruiting people, I've done thousands of interviews now. I mean, quite literally thousands of interviews. In my cluster alone last year, I was part of recruiting 520 new teachers. That was just last year. That doesn't count admins, SLT, that's just teachers. And when I say I'm part of that, I genuinely try to be involved in nearly all appointments across the team. And the reason for that is because I recruit based on values. I focus on the type of human being that's in front of me. I focus on what they're going to bring to the table from their heart and soul as much as possible. And this is something that you have to tune into, and this is something that you have to practice, but it is a really deliberate and intentional practice that I have done for now many, many years, and I get better every year at identifying that. Because in my mind, I can train and support any colleague that walks through the door of a school. If they're working in a school environment, we've already got them halfway there. They're already working with a purpose. They're already in the right place to learn and grow and get better. But if those values at the core of them have not aligned to the school values or the cultural values that you're trying to address, then that's going to be more and more difficult. So be deliberate and be intentional. Now, to do that, though, you need to map your talent and you need to have succession planning in place. Mapping is a very deliberate exercise. It needs to be a plan that you take with your team, and you can do all sorts of wonderful tools, whether it's 360 reviews or looking through different performance management tools that are out there. There are loads of ways to do it. But you need to map your talent and think about how we're going to then make sure that in every role, including your own, there is at least one, hopefully more, but at least one person that can step in and is ready to step up to fill that place. Because then what you don't have is what happens in many organizations, that lagging culture where new colleagues are brought in, nothing wrong with that. But if those new colleagues are brought in without the right values and without that wraparound of a core team of people that are all about the same direction, then what you end up with is a lag in school improvement, sometimes worst case scenario, a lapse in student outcomes, and then you have reputational damage that's really difficult to overcome. So you've got to be deliberate and you've got to be intentional. And I really want to talk about GFS, my school, because at the moment in my SLT, and as I said, it's a fairly big school, so it's a decent sized SLT, but 90% of my SLT have grown from their current roles within. And this was not just fortuitous. I'm blessed with amazing people, there's no doubt about that. But it wasn't just good fortune. This was deliberately and intentionally planned with a purpose in mind that I want to make sure in this busy international school environment, if somebody decides they want a different opportunity or they decide to go back home, which happens more often than not, you never let that school improvement journey stop, stall, or cause any paralysis, because it can't. It has to keep going and it has to continue. So I'm really proud of my team. I'm incredibly proud of what they do. And when I look at what my senior team achieve every day in this school, in what is a fairly busy environment, I promise you that I know I've recruited deliberately and that intentionally I've definitely managed the succession planning well at our school. That moves on to the third big area, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll do my best to stick to what I said, Claire. So professional development is really critical. I'm just going to give you 3 parts. There is so much to PD, and you can find a million things out there, but there are going to be 3 parts to what I'd just like to share. The first is coaching. Now, if any of you out there have had a coach, whether that be a sports coach or an instructional coach in a classroom, or in fact a leadership coach, you will know the power that that can bring. Now, when I was 32 years old, so 14 years ago today, I took on my first headship. And it was in a lovely little school in Athens, Greece, in the northern suburbs of Athens. Absolutely beautiful, gorgeous school, and a great place to be a head for the first time. I was absolutely overwhelmed with what I was trying to do as a leader, though. Not only was I a young leader, but also I was in a different environment. It was an international context. It was a fee-paying context for the first time. It was overwhelming. The best thing that I did, and what I would recommend to anybody listening, is I got myself a coach, a leadership coach. I've had 3 different ones over those 14 years, but even up until today, where I have the amazing Dr. Helen Wright as my coach, I continue to be supported and challenged by that person. And what that does is help me reflect and look from within for the answers, so that I can do my very best next time round to be ready for the challenges that I face. And any leader that I've ever met, if you can only do one thing, I would recommend have a coach. You don't have to have it all the time, constantly dip in and out, but have a coach that will just walk you through those challenging moments, because leadership, and particularly school leadership at the top, it can be a really lonely place. And you need somebody to be able to guide and support you and challenge your thinking so that you can keep moving forward. Now, the second part is mentoring, which is, of course, distinctly different. That's somebody you go to get answers. A coach, frustratingly sometimes, wants you to only get the answers by questioning you from within. But a mentor provides the answers. When I started my journey, which was far too long ago now, but as an NQT in South London, I taught in 2 boroughs there called Southwark and Lambeth. So around the kind of Peckham, Camberwell Green, and then into Brixton area for any of you that know London really well. And I had the most amazing NQT mentor called Jim Henderson. And I still remember him vividly, even though it was, 20 odd years ago. And Jim Henderson took me on that journey as being an NQT in an incredibly challenging environment where behavior was not at its best most of the time. And when as an NQT, I was still trying to learn how to actually be a half decent teacher. Now, Jim Henderson was one of the best mentors that I could have ever asked for. And completely that was fortuitous. I can't say that was deliberate or intentional. I found him there. He found me there. For 10 years, I worked alongside Jim through middle leadership into an extended leader role and eventually into a director of sixth form role in Brixton in Lambeth Academy. And that man, I owe him so much, and I've told him this publicly and I've said it before, but he was a mentor for me that helped guide me throughout some of the really difficult and helped me navigate through some of the really difficult parts of that early levels of leadership. So find a mentor. And when you do, grab hold of them like I did with Jim, and I didn't let him go for 10 years, and I followed him around South London, making sure that I could keep learning from him. And every now and then I still message him now just to dip back in. And qualifications and courses are probably more the obvious PD. All I would say about this is to draw you back to the two words I started with, deliberate and intentional. There are so many options. And perhaps I'm speaking a bit more as a principal from this one, but have a look and make sure that the cost is linked to the impact. There are so many great things out there, and some don't cost you anything, like this wonderful webinar you're at today. And some of them cost you hundreds of thousands. And you really need to make sure that that is worthwhile, and the impact should always come to one simple point, which is student outcomes. Is it impacting students' lives? Is it making them better people, more prepared for the future? Is it improving their grades? Whatever it is, but the outcome students come to your school for, if that course is not directly correlated to that, it's probably not worth doing. Doesn't mean that you don't go and do it, but it's probably not as worthwhile. So I would just say be deliberate and intentional with your teams when they come to you with these great courses. Ask them those questions, have that radical candor, challenge them in their questions about why they want to do this. And then if it is something that you support, make sure it's linked to direct impact in your school. So that brings me hopefully to a conclusion nearly. The cycle is there, I hope, and as you can see, it feeds each other. So if you continue to do professional development and you continue to coach, mentor, and invest in people, your culture will be directly impacted from it. If you recruit the right people and you recruit with a values base, your culture will be impacted by it. If you retain all the great people, then your professional development can grow because you can cascade the professional development that those many colleagues have learned over years and years and years. This is a challenge in a private international school environment, but if you get it right, it really can then feed back into that culture. And what you see is a very deliberate and very intentional plan to hopefully navigate some of the challenges of leadership. So I hope I've done what I came to do, which is to deliver some ideas around that. I thank you all very much for listening to me, hopefully intently, and look forward to answering some questions in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Thank you for sharing those insights. Thank you for sharing those slides and recommendations for books as well. It was fascinating to learn then about your team and how you said 90% of your SLT now is made up of those candidates that you recruited and kind of have developed that journey throughout school. So I think that there was some really great stuff in there that lots of people were kind of enjoying throughout. It'd be really interesting as well for people in the chat to let us know if you do have a trusted mentor or a coach, just to see how people kind of are actually, how many people are supported in that way at the moment, and potentially then it's something to look to if you're looking for that additional support. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move now into our panel discussion. And so to kickstart this off, I'd like to then introduce our two other experts who are joining us today. I'd like them to just start with a little introduction so they can introduce themselves. So I'm going to start first of all with Lucinda.
Thanks, Claire. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Matthew. That was so wonderful to hear about all of your experiences in South London and in your journey over to the Middle East. I started in England too, down in Brighton, and I've worked in leadership of special educational needs. I was a Senko in the UK for some time, and then moved into the IB international world in about 2011. And I've been a school leader of IB schools for about the last 8 years. So my background, as I say, is in learning support and special needs, but I'm currently the upper school principal at ACS Egham back in the UK. So my international world, I spanned the globe. I started in Brazil in a school over there running their learning support teams, then moved to Japan into a wonderful school in Nagoya and had multiple leadership roles in that school, including leading their learning support, but then moving into director of learning and then eventually a wonderful title of director of wellbeing. And really enjoyed that. I've worked in Dwight, London, and then the last 4 years before I just moved back to England in Abu Dhabi, so very close to you, Matthew, at Raha International School in a small startup. So not quite your startup, Matthew. I think we were on our journey to 3,000, but watching that, navigating that fast growth is a really fast leadership learning journey as well. And I'm now in my current position of coming into, I was thinking about it as Matthew was talking, I've come into an inherited team. So I really loved what Matthew said about anyone who comes through the door of a school, I can work with them. Because yes, recruitment, you can recruit for your values and you can start to bring people in. But also sometimes as a leader, we take on a team, a pre-existing team and a pre-existing culture. And there's a way to navigate that requires all of the things that you were talking about, Matthew. So thank you. I'm writing things down and thinking as you were presenting too, because the navigating the challenges of leadership, it never ends. You don't become the expert in it. I don't think it's an ongoing learning journey that we're in together for a long time. So great to be here with you all. I'm really looking forward to the discussion with these great people on the panel with me.
Thank you, Lucinda. And Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Morning, everyone. And yeah, Matthew, just to echo that, I think I was nodding along a little bit there and writing notes like Lucinda going, yeah, I recognise that. So my name's Lauren. I am currently based in Bahrain at St Christopher's School, where I am Director of Learning. This is my second year at the school, just coming up to the end of my second year here. I also started my career in the UK many years ago as a psychology teacher in Suffolk, but I only was in the UK for about 4 years before I made the transition into international schools. But I actually was quite lucky because I really landed on my feet. I went off to Vietnam and found a fantastic school there and was there for 13 years and was able to then sort of do as Matthew just explained there, make my way through the school and my leadership journey. So I went from sort of head of department through head of sixth form into assistant head and finally deputy head of whole school, which then led me into this director of learning role over here at St Chris. So I've sort of done both of those things where you grow as a leader through a school and then you like Lucinda, you move and you inherit a team and you inherit a group of people and a culture that you're starting to navigate and understand. And those two things are very, very different and have their different challenges when you're moving and when you're known. So yeah, I think that's my journey really. I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the questions.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. So we're going to start today because we want to include everybody who's with us in the event kind of live. So we've got a poll question for our attendees to start, and then from that we are going to jump into some of the questions that we have prepared. So I'm just going to close this one back. I'm just going to start our panel poll now. This is a question for you. I'd like to ask, what is the most pressing challenge that you face in school leadership at the moment? So if you could just put your thoughts in here, I'm going to give you 60 seconds and then we'll close this and I can share those results. If there are answers that are not in here, please do add them to the chat. Okay, I'm going to end this poll here. So lots of people say managing team dynamics and conflict. Lots of people balancing leadership and academic workload, managing staff well-being. So there seems to be something kind of in each of these, but some really high numbers then, particularly around team dynamics and conflict. So we'll jump into the questions. And then hopefully we're able to kind of address some of these that have come up for you. So our first question is for Matthew. We wanted to ask, what are the most common team dynamic challenges that you've faced as a leader at international schools, and how did you address them effectively?
Hey, right, so I think, well, I like the rule of three, so we'll stick with three. So there's one of the team dynamics issues I have faced, and I've worked with 3 turnaround schools in my cluster as well, and this is a big part of that, was misalignment to the vision and the values. So misunderstanding what it was about, why they were there, and therefore going off and doing other things. Then the second part, which probably will most people will understand, although it's one of the hardest parts to deal with, is the kind of politics and the game playing and the, as I said, leaving the room and saying something different to what you said in the room. I think that is a big challenge. And then the third one, paralysis in decision making. So when people love to have meetings, and everybody loves a good meeting, and lots of conversations happen, and everybody sits there and agrees, yes, that's what we're going to go and do. But then actually the decision making either isn't translated, or the meeting ends without a decision. I mean, that's one of the worst scenarios for me, is when you just walk out of a room and go, why did we do that? So those 3 parts, I'd say misalignment to what you're trying to do, the politics and the silliness, and then decision making, either a paralysis of it or an implementation issue of it. And how would I overcome was the second part, Claire, just so I can check I'm answering probably here. So, I mean, look, I won't repeat my presentation because it would be easy for me to say, well, create a proper culture, do good PD and recruit the right people. But actually, I think that the most important way to overcome any team dynamics issues is to be fully open and transparent about them. When I talked about radical candor, that is part of it. You must tell everybody exactly how they feel. You don't need to be, it doesn't need to be adversarial. It doesn't need to be mean-spirited. There's no reason for any of that, but it does need to be really open and transparent about the impact that either a behavior or a misalignment, misunderstanding is having on the continued school improvement journey that you're taking. So in reality, you start with an honest, transparent conversation with either an individual or, and I definitely have done this with the whole team, where you all air all the issues and the problems and the concerns in one space, and then you agree to put those to bed and you move forward. But once you've done that, and I would finish with a practical part to this as well, is that you then need to hold people accountable to that. And I think, accountability is such a misused word, but the accountability comes from, look, we've all sat here, we've just agreed something, we've all decided it. If you then haven't, I am going to call you back and we are going to talk about this. And there is going to be a consequence of some sort. It doesn't have to be disciplinary or anything, but there is going to be a consequence. You are going to be challenged about this, because in reality, so many of those things that go unchallenged, what you find out, and particularly in an ecosystem like this school, the ripple effect happens, and suddenly, Mr. Matthew has said all sorts of things, and people are coming back to me saying that I've said all sorts of things, and actually that wasn't anything to do with the decision that we made as a team. So I think that those 3 challenges, and like I say, honesty, transparency, and accountability would be how I deal with it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I don't know if Lucinda or Lauren, you had anything else to add to that, or we can jump into our next question. No, I think that was, I think you really did kind of explore lots of options there to deal with those really difficult team dynamics. So Lauren, we were going to jump to you next and ask you, how do you intentionally build trust and alignment when joining a new school with established teams where dynamics are already set?
Yeah, so that's what we were just talking about, wasn't it? The age-old issue of walking into an established space, and how do you then, share who you are and build that trust? I think, particularly when you're in sort of a high-performing space, you're not ever walking into a blank canvas. And I think you have to really just be aware and very self-aware of that you're walking into this living culture. It's been built over a number of years. There's lots of traditions. There's lots of politics, as Matthew mentioned there. There's all these things that you might not see on the surface. The thing that I've really found is that most places tend to be very, welcoming and friendly to you when you're there. You're there for interview. You're there for whatever's going on. And that's for me going into a space, but also when I've had leaders come to the school that I've worked at and so on. But those are the things that you see on the surface, and you really have to be prepared to put the work in to get to understand the things that you don't see on the surface, the things that people don't tell you in those first bits and so on. I've seen people do this really, really well, and I've seen people do this less well. And the people that do it well always come from a space of curiosity. So when you're joining somewhere new, it's what can I learn about this, and how quickly can I learn it? And being aware of the things that, well, knowing that you don't know everything, and knowing that you don't have all the answers, and knowing that what you did in your previous school that worked really well now might not. You know, when you've gone through a school and you've built that cultural capital, you've built that trust, you can get away with more, because people say, oh, I'm not 100% on board with this, but I know the last thing you did was really good, and I know that the last thing that we did together worked really well. So even though I'm not fully there, I'll go with you, because I think that I know you can do this. And I know that if you get it wrong, you'll hold your hand up and you'll say, we got this wrong, we'll explore why, and so on. But when you move to a new space, you know, all people know about you coming in is what was on your CV, what's on your LinkedIn profile, where they've looked at you all over the internet to try and find out what you're about, but they don't know you as a person, and they don't know that they can trust you. So I think that's a really, really important thing, is building that trust and making sure that from everything you do, you're wearing who you are outwardly, and not trying to hide the vision, the values, the things that you want to be, and really model how you want other people to interact with you. I think exploring other team dynamics is also really important. So, you know, a lot of active listening, listen far more than you speak, and get yourself into as much as you can. One of the things that I really did when I first joined St. Christopher's was be present and be out. So, you know, I was there at the front of school. My role doesn't naturally, I'm not part of a particular campus team. So I'm working between campuses. I'm spending half a week in one space and half a week in another space. But very intentionally, it was about being out, it was being visible. It was going down, saying hello to people who were on the duty in the morning, saying hello to the parents and the students, getting into as many meetings as I could. So just making sure that you're there for staff briefings, that you are listening to what's being said and what's not being said, what is being talked about and what isn't. And really starting to get a feel for the rhythm of the school. So I think once you start to get that, that's when you can really start to then, you know, start to make decisions and impact, you know, conversation, and people can then start to trust you. So they'll then start sharing more, and you start offering advice, or you offer an alternative viewpoint, and it's gradual and it's over time. And I think you really do have to be very patient as well. It's quite a strange feeling when you move from somewhere where you know that you can say something and people will understand what you mean. And then when you move to a new space, you really have to think a lot more carefully about the messaging. You have to think a lot more carefully about the things you say and the way that it might be interpreted, because people don't know the history and so on. So you can't tap into that as much. And so for me, that first year was really about, spending a lot of time building those relationships, getting to know people one-to-one, having a real open door policy. And people are curious about you as well. They do come to you. They do come and ask you questions. They do test you. They do ask you what you think about some of the challenging things or things that they might not like, and so on. And I think you just have to be really open and honest, and have a lot of humility as well. So being aware of what you don't know. The leaders that I've seen really struggle with coming into a new space are those that have come in with a sort of, I'm going to fix everything that's wrong with this place attitude, and a sort of arrogance that I'm the savior coming in to fix all the problems. And, you know, people are in the school because they enjoy being there. They don't think there are problems. They like their space. So if you come in with that sort of attitude, you can really get people's backs up straight away. And then it's a really hard space to come back from as well. So I think you've got to start off on the right foot, and you've got to start building that trust. And it's about being quietly consistent in everything that you do, and being, I think just not surprising people too much. You know, when they come to see you, they know what they're going to get with you, being that level-headed person and so on, and being open and honest. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren. There was lots there that I was kind of noting down whilst you were speaking, and lots of people kind of nodding along as well. I really like that idea of wearing who you are, that idea of that quiet consistency throughout, some really kind of sage advice. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to jump into our next question, which is for Lucinda. And Lucinda, we wanted to ask you about the role that emotional intelligence plays in your leadership.
Well, I think it's absolutely aligned with what Lauren's just been talking about, and she was just outlining all of that kind of emotional literacy work that you have to do when you're in this new environment. And of course, it works throughout your leadership work. But I think all of those things are so important in terms of starting with knowing yourself. I think one of the things I've really had to work on as a leader is to recognize my own emotional responses and try and look underneath what I'm feeling to understand what's really happening for me. Matthew talked about coaching. I had some coaching at one point where the coach talked to me about a lot of our responses are linked to judgment or comparison, and to really try and recognize when you're either judging yourself or comparing yourself or judging others or comparing others to each other. And he was saying to me, you can't stop that. Your brain's going to naturally do those things, but please try and recognize when you're doing them and that that's what's happening to you. So one of the things that I try and do is to be self-aware, and really especially around my reactions. A little phrase that is not originated by me that I love is emotions have memories. So sometimes when I recognize that reaction that I'm having, it's because of something I've experienced before. And I need to see whether that's really what's happening to me in this present moment, or if it's related to something that's happened to me before. That phrase will also applies really well when working with others to try and understand their emotional reactions. So coming into my new situation where there's been reactions from staff, there was a change that I was bringing into the predicted grades policy, which got a big emotional reaction from the staff. And eventually I was able to unpack that it was based on something that had happened to them with a previous leadership team. And so we were able to work through that a little bit. So that kind of self-awareness, but then also trying to understand others' behavior as a communication and looking underneath it. I love a little phrase. Matthew likes his threes. I like a little catchphrase. And the other one that I stole is resistance is an unmet need. So again, when you're feeling resistance from people and emotions, what is it really that they're not getting that they want from you or from the situation? So looking for what's happening underneath the emotions, I think, is a big part of emotional intelligence. And then again, Lauren was talking about this a lot, this idea of communication as a leader. I think you need to have that emotional intelligence to understand about the way that you're being interpreted at all times. And Lauren talked really beautifully about that. I had had something early on in my job. I started in August. A couple of months in, a teacher told me that they had emailed me about a medical appointment and I hadn't responded. And that stayed with that person. It was quite a small thing to me, but for that person, that was an indicator of who I am. Now, we were able to work through it, and I was really glad that she was able to share it with me. But those kind of things matter, and that's what Lauren was talking about. People are watching you, and they're kind of taking in information about who you are based on what you do. So your actions are really important. So understanding that kind of emotional connection to your actions is really, really key. And then the last thing I wanted to share, because I also love the book Radical Candor. And I think in order to really enact that radical candor, you have to have some emotional intelligence, because it can be wielded without emotional intelligence can be a very blunt object, right, Matthew? And that kind of feedback can start to become quite painful. But wielded with emotional intelligence and understanding of others, I think it can be a very powerful tool as a leader.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucinda. Does anybody have anything else that they wanted to add there as well? No, we're happy. I mean, yeah, again, I think that you're offering such depth to these answers, and there's lots of agreement across the board in terms of what you're doing. Yeah, it was. I've written down all of these little kind of phrases that you've captured, because I love to kind of bank these as well, of these little insights. I think that idea of emotions have memories, I thought was really key, and it really speaks to how difficult the role of a leader is trying to manage all of this and have that emotional intelligence behind. Thank you so much for sharing. And so our next question then was for Matthew. We wanted to ask you about recruitment. So we wanted to ask, how do you recruit and support new members of staff from early career teachers to SLT to ensure that they fit into the ethos and ways of working in your school?
Thank you, Claire. I just want to say I loved listening to Lucinda and Lauren's answers, and I'm going to definitely steal at least two things they've said. But I think let's start with the thread that Lauren began with and then Lucinda picked up, which is the small details. So when you're recruiting anybody, doesn't matter. And I know we're talking about, you know, leaders or teachers, but actually administrative staff are just as important and can often be the heart and soul of a school. So when you're recruiting anybody, it is the little details that matter. So the way that anybody is received, the way that anybody is greeted is really important. If any, I still go on recruitment trips, for instance. So I still go on a recruitment campaign where I'll go to England for 6-7 days. I'll meet 13-14 teachers a day. It is intense. It is a little bit insane, but it's really critical because I want to meet all of them personally and I want to speak to them. I want to see them. But the way that you greet an individual, the way that you respect what they're bringing in, even if, and many of mine are young ECTs, they've just started, even if they haven't got all that experience and credibility, they're still clutching their portfolios, that they've got some lesson observations in that they want to show you. And I think that the detail or the small part of that is when you can see that a person is nervous and they're bringing something that they're already a bit nervous about, you can use the emotional intelligence that Lucinda was talking about to just bring the temperature of that meeting down before you ask them any questions. So you can ask to just look at the portfolio, start saying some positive things, talk to them about what they've got in here and that, you know, you really like what they've referenced. You can just bring it down so that actually what you're going to see is the genuine, real person in front of you. Whereas if you just go straight ahead and get on with the questions because, you know, I've got 13 more to see that day, then I'm hopping on a train and I've got 40, you know, if you get into that mentality, you end up not treating them as an individual. They will feel that and they will remember that. Just like that email about the doctor's appointment Lucinda referenced, they will remember that and they won't necessarily want to come and work with you. They won't want to come and work with somebody who doesn't even recognize that they're nervous or worried. So you just recognize the details, make sure that people feel comfortable. And over the thousands and thousands of now interviews that I've performed, I now just treat them as conversations. I think I probably ask maybe 2 questions in the whole time. And then it's just more a chat about, okay, well, that's really interesting. What about this? What have you thought about this? And I'm constantly feeding in, deliberately and intentionally feeding in points about my values and my cultures in the school that I have the privilege to lead here, because I want to hear their responses to that. I don't want to hear their technical skills. If I can't watch them teaching, anybody can say anything. I want to hear the type of human being they are. I want to hear what they value and whether that aligns with who we are. There's no good or bad, but does it align with who we are? So I think it's really important. And the small details continue all the way up until that moment you pick them up. So I'm sure leaders all across the world still do this, but I still go to the airport and pick up the teachers. So it's usually about 70 to 100 that we pick up every year, just for my school, let alone for the rest. But I still go there at midnight on that Manchester flight as it lands and pick them up. And you know, you don't recall everything because you're a bit bleary and you haven't quite got anything. But there was a teacher that came to me, must have been a few months ago anyway, but they've been with us for a few years. And they recalled the moment that I helped them get their SIM card. And it sounds like such a tiny little thing, doesn't it? But they recalled that because that meant that that night they could check in home. This was a little 22-year-old teacher, you know, a little child who just joined us. And they were checking in at home. But because I went and helped them and gave them the ability to speak to their family, and it was a simple gesture, I just went and helped them get it. 3-4 years later, they've recalled that. So the details matter when you're recruiting people, when you're onboarding them, when you're bringing them into the school. The small little details matter.
Thank you so much for sharing. Again, some really great insights in there, and kind of really echoing, you know, what we're building on in terms of that idea of really those people focusing on, the individual and building that kind of that trust and accountability throughout. We've got a couple of questions that are also dropping into the chat. Some of these were about recruitment as well, and somebody asking about kind of diversification in recruitment practices. We potentially might have time to answer some of these at the end, but I'll give you a little bit of time to kind of reflect on that. And if we do have the time, and maybe we can address those. Our next question that we wanted to jump into was a question then for Lauren, where we wanted to ask, how do you ensure accountability across your team without micromanaging or damaging morale? And I think this is useful to say that this is useful also for middle leaders as well as senior leaders.
Oh, this is such a tough one, because I think I've probably been accused of being a micromanager at various points in time. And other times I've been told that I need to be a bit more involved. So it's sort of, a lot of this depends on your team and knowing when the team needs you to step in and when the team needs you to stay back. So I think using that emotional intelligence we've been talking about and building up that repertoire of knowing how to navigate with different teams is really, really important. So I think accountability and autonomy are sometimes seen as being slightly at odds by staff, which is where you can sort of feel like you're being micromanaged sometimes, because you feel like you haven't got the autonomy perhaps to make the decisions you want to make and so on. So I think it's really important to try and navigate holding people accountable whilst also making sure they feel they have the autonomy, and so therefore you aren't doing that micromanaging. They absolutely can coexist, but you have to have that clarity and you have to have that trust. And I talked about earlier about, you know, having to build people to trust me, but I also have to trust my teams first and foremost. You know, if you go in with starting from a place of distrust, then you've got to come back from that somehow, and it can take quite a long time to get there. I'd much rather go in trusting people with that curious mindset and asking the right questions and checking in, than being that kind of micromanager and overlooking things. So I think it's really important that you start as well with how you set up those relationships with those teams as well. So one of the things I like to do at the start of every year with the teams that I work with is to do a bit of a SWOT analysis. And so I'll work with the leader of the team, who I would be probably line managing or meeting with quite regularly every couple of weeks to check in and see what's going on, but work with them to determine how they'd want to do that with their team. And then they very much lead it, but through with the conversation with me there as well, just to kind of start to understand where the team feels their strengths are lying and where they feel there's gaps or opportunities that they could be working towards. And people are often very honest in that kind of forum, and are able to celebrate the wins, celebrate the things they do really, really well. And that's really, really important, that you're celebrating what's going really well within a team or the work that they're doing. But then also you can then see where perhaps they might not have spoken about the things that they really want to do, and bring that out into the open. And so, okay, well, as a team, we all think that this is the way we need to go. So let's work on this together, and let's do that. And by doing that, you're giving that sort of autonomy of choice to that team, but then you're also getting them to come up with things to hold them to account too. So, you know, you've said this is what you're going to do this year. These are the actions you want to take. This is the way you want to explore it. All right, I'm going to come back and check in on that because you've created this direction you want to go in. And so I think it's much easier then to hold people to account when they've bought into the change that you're making or that they're making within that space. We have I also think that accountability goes hand in hand with quality assurance, which is often feels like a bit of a dirty word in education. I think people bristle when they hear the terms quality assurance. And I always say, well, you know what? I need to be able to say, hand on heart, that I know the fantastic things that are going on in your team. Like, I know there's amazing things happening in my school. When somebody else comes in, I need to be able to say, I know it because of this. Not just I've got a feeling, but I know it because I've seen it, because we've got the evidence there. We've built that over time. So another way we do that is through sort of a departmental review process, where, again, sometimes it can be very top down. And I think sometimes many of us coming out of the UK who've had experience of various inspections and accreditations and things that does come from sort of a place of judgment. How is my lesson outstanding or not? I think you try and get away from that as quickly as possible to, are we doing the best thing for our students? Are we growing as a team? And are we moving in that direction that we've set out for ourselves? And if we're not, why not? What are those barriers? What can I do to help you to remove those barriers? Because a lot about what we need to do as leaders, and this is for middle leaders and senior leaders and leadership across the school, and even leaders within your classroom, your job first and foremost is about removing the barriers to success. It's about making sure that your teams have got those conditions in which they can do the job that you've set out for them to do. So if they've come up with an action plan, or they've come up with a direction of travel that they can't achieve, well, is it realistic? Have you actually set something that they can do? Have they got the resources? Have they had the time? Have they had the training? What is it? And so on. So I think setting that direction together is really, really important, to then feel like it's not quite so micromanaging. It's coming from what we want to do as a team. And then that regular check-in doesn't have to be a formal check-in, you know, it's where are you at with this? It's a conversation, it's a coaching conversation often. And people like you as a sounding board, you know, I'm here to help you unstick where you're stuck, not to tell you what to do. And I think that's a really, really important thing to be within any team is take that coaching mentality.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing, Lauren. Some really great advice in there. I think, like you said, it was a really difficult question, and it can be that really difficult line to kind of tread. And so we're just going to jump straight into our next question so we can get through as much as possible, as we've got 2 questions left. We've got the time. So Matthew, our next question was for you. We wanted to ask, as a senior leader, you can be faced with many difficult decisions. Can you share an example of a high pressure decision that you had to make and how you communicated it with clarity and confidence?
Yes, I will do my best. So I won't take us too far back. I've taken you through my career journey, but I'll actually just go back to this August. So August 2024, I had the challenge of opening 2 new schools at the same time. So we were opening one in Dubai South and one in Abu Dhabi, both founders schools, so a brand that I know and love and you know, been obviously part of creating, but opening 2 brand new schools, and even though in the same country in different emirates at the same time, was an incredibly challenging summer. For those who haven't been to the UAE, a summer is usually about 48 to 50 degrees too. So going on building sites, you know, like that, it can have its own physical challenges, let alone anything else. So opening those 2 schools, and the one in Abu Dhabi, we were aiming to open with over 1,000, and Dubai South was 700-800, of which we've exceeded both of those targets, fortunately. But, you know, we were then bringing in all those new families, those new children, those new teachers. And one of the parts of opening a new school out here is that you have to agree to bring in staff from outside. So a high percentage of your staff as a new school have to come in from outside of the UAE. That's one of the agreements with the authorities. So you do get a few clever people who know the area, but actually a lot come in it fresh yeah, don't know the surroundings at all. So if you break that down, you've got to open 2 structures which were never going to be on time, and they never are, unfortunately, my experience. They're always a few days, few weeks, not quite ready. You've got onboarding of staff and colleagues and all of the admin. You've got that within a building that doesn't exist. You've then got children and parents who need to be onboarded, and a culture that doesn't even exist because the building doesn't even exist. So if you wrap all of that up, just doing one was hard. And I'd done 3 before that. I did 1 at a time, but this one, doing 2, was really, really difficult. And it genuinely pushed me, I think, to my absolute limits. I've asked my boss to never do that to me again, because it really did push me to my limits. How did I overcome it? Well, if I go back to some of the points I've made, but I'll start with the most critical one, I made sure that the 2 leaders were the best people to drive those things forward. So both of them were colleagues that came from within. Both of them were colleagues that either I'd worked with directly or I'd worked with indirectly for many years. So I knew that these 2 people knew exactly what we were about. They'd understood it. I knew that I had a window of time with them to support them, so that when they opened the schools, and then I was coming back to remember be the principal here and starting a school year here, they could actually get on with it. So I recruited the right people in the leadership roles that needed to do. I then made sure that I invested in them so that they had real trust and faith that I was going to back them even when it went wrong. And, you know, colleagues on the call, you know, in their questions have talked about it. It's such a critical thing. You have to know that when it goes wrong, you're going to be backed up and you're not going to be thrown under the bus, to use a colloquialism, you know, and it's really, really important. So I backed them, and it did go wrong. There were orders that didn't come through. There were rooms that weren't ready. There were teachers that didn't get on a plane and arrive. It did go wrong, as it always does. So being able to create that trust and that environment where they felt the first thing that they could do was pick up the phone and tell me when it was going wrong, rather than me finding out the other side of it, probably kept a little bit of sanity that I've still got left, because they knew that if they just called me, they'd either get a bit of help, a little bit of support, or at least I'd be able to mitigate some of the risks that would come later down the line. So being able to have that culture between us where they really feel that they can trust me is so important. And then the clarity of communication, you mentioned it in your question, but it's so critical because you are trying to tell people things, whether that be teachers, leaders, parents, or in fact, children. You're trying to tell them things that are constantly changing and moving. So the shifting sands, we're in a desert here, so I'll use that analogy, but in reality, they're shifting every day. You are having an authority approval that comes in on site and says yes or no that day. And you don't know whether they're going to say yes or no until they come on that day. And you're then having to change your communication to adjust a day, give yourself another 24 hours, or in fact longer if needed. You're having to take the teachers and have PD in a hotel with them because the building's not ready, which you said it would be when they got on the plane and they would arrive. So you're already having to unwind some of that immediate distrust that comes, like, I've just flown, I've just arrived in a new country, I have no idea what I'm doing, and now they're putting me in a hotel and they're telling me the building will be ready. But they told me the building would be ready. So and I know I'm going into detail and nuances, but I'm just trying to frame the picture a bit more for people who are listening, is that all these little factors, all these small details just build into an incredibly complex situation. And it's a bit like a powder keg that you're kind of waiting for it to go off at any point. But the only way you can retain sanity in these things is you work as a team, you collaborate, you support each other through it. You make sure that when things go wrong, you take it as a team. There are no fingers being pointed. You take it as a team together. And ultimately, as I was the sort of most senior person overseeing that, it would be my responsibility if it came to it. And my leaders and principals who had that protection, if you want to call it, that had felt like they had that allowed them to go and lead with such great courage. And both of them, I mean, Ian and Al, in those two schools, what they achieved, I wish that I'd known what they did when I opened this school 9 years ago. I wish I'd been half as good as they are when I opened this 9 years ago, because they have just done a phenomenal job of creating that culture. And yeah, so hopefully I've articulated that. It's a big one, but I've articulated that well enough.
Thank you, Matthew. And so we've got 2 minutes. We're screeching to a halt. For those who can stay, I'm going to drop the link for your certificate in now. For those who can stay just for a few more minutes, I'd love to ask this question, because again, this is a really key question that came up when we were planning this discussion. And this question was for Lucinda. We wanted to ask you, how do you effectively manage relationships with parents who may have challenging expectations and what you should deliver for your children?
Well, we're in the business of relationships, and this relationships with parents is so key, especially when you move into fee-paying international world. And I've just moved back to the UK in the middle of a VAT fee increase, which has been interesting in the way that it's affected our relationship with parents. But a lot of the things we've already talked about are absolutely aligned to how we manage parents. And I'm noticing in the chat that I think we have quite a lot of middle leaders here. And I was thinking about how key middle leadership is in managing these relationships with parents and their expectations, because things can often jump to me as the principal that actually probably could have been dealt with at a middle leadership level just by thinking about some of these strategies that we've been talking about today. So that sense of how does it feel when the parents contact us with their expectations, and I don't know, I mean, in a couple of schools that I've worked in, some of the language that parents can use can feel quite hurtful and quite personal at times, if I'm honest, especially when you're really working hard to do your best for the students. So I think, again, like I talked about before, checking in with your own emotional response and understanding how you're responding is a really important first step. The next thing, it's really obvious, but just listen. I can remember really clearly a parent coming to see me and I was thinking, why are they telling me this, Scott? I don't need to know this right now. And my brain just going, just listen. They just need you to listen. And I just had to, and when you're really busy, sometimes that's hard because you've got a million jobs that you want to do. But the investment of that time of listening is really worthwhile, I think. And then my beautiful boss, Matthew Parr in Nagoya, used to say, presume positive intent. Another one of my little catchphrases, that one I can say where I heard it from. And he genuinely did that so beautifully. But that refreshing it in your mind, this is a person who loves and cares about their child, who wants the best for their child, who may be afraid or guilty that they've made a wrong decision, especially sometimes putting them into an IB school like mine. I've taken a step out of my own experience of education into something that feels very different. So really to understand where that fear and that doubt and that worry is coming from. And then all of those little things that we do, that we've been talking about throughout this, of the small things. How do we communicate? How do we connect? Where are we present? Where can they get to talk to us? How can we make sure that we're open in terms of they feel like they can come, and actually go right back to what Matthew was talking about at the beginning? Can we set up a space where I can be challenged and questioned by the parents in a safe, radical, candor way to really help me to understand where they're coming from? And I want to share a little example. Very recently, again, about we had I don't know if I already said this, but the mock exams, and the parents were writing me saying the workload's too heavy right now. They're not ready for these exams. I was thinking, where's all this worry coming from? Then I realized what they were worried about was that mock exam grade was going to be used to write their predicted grade for university. And actually what I needed to share was the predicted grade policy, so that they understood that there was a multitude of data points that were going to be used to make that predicted grade. So the original message wasn't actually the thing that was really worrying them. And I needed to take a bit of time to understand what bit of communication I'd missed that would have reduced that anxiety in the parents. So middle leaders, you can do all of those things as well. You're really, really key in that. And you can stop it jumping too quickly up to the top of the school, and really kind of see those parents off at the pass with these exact same kind of strategies. So thank you. I know I went over time there.
No, thank you so much for sharing. It's such a big question. And I think something that lots of people are kind of coming back with about managing those relationships with parents. And it's such a key relationship to really get right. And it's a really difficult relationship as well to balance across the school for all staff. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you everybody for joining us today. The recording will go out in the next few days. So we should have this available hopefully from Monday, if not Monday, then Tuesday. So we can get this out so that you can go back and reflect on some of these points further. Thank you everybody who joined us in the chat and putting your thoughts in there as well. It was really interesting to see some of those questions that were coming up. So thank you everybody for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.